He hath made the earth by his power.
Power.
He established the world by his wisdom.
Wisdom.
And hath stretched out the heavens by his discretion.
Discretion.
Notice, God took his power and created the earth. He took energy and made matter. It's almost like E equals MC squared.
Dude, seriously? Seriously!
Welcome back everyone to Bridge the Divide, where we examine irrational beliefs, the irrational behaviors that often follow, and how with education, rationality, and reason we can bridge the societal divides that they create. I'd first like to apologize to everyone for the delay in new content. It's no lie that sometimes after a great vacation it can be kind of hard to get back into the groove of things. That, coupled with various life things that keep popping up here and there, it's been kind of a madhouse around here, but I assure you I am back in the swing of things. Hopefully. That all being said, your patience with me is greatly appreciated, and I hope you enjoyed today's response to a video from the channel Case Boer Ministry, which is run by Dutch missionary Case Boer. Now, for a bit of context, when he's not producing apologetics content for his personal ministry on YouTube, Case spends his time doing missionary work for the Commission to Every Nation, or C10 group, which is an interdenominational co-op dedicated to missionary work specifically targeting third world nations, with Case himself appearing to focus his efforts in the extremely impoverished South American nation of Bolivia, a beautiful country with a deep, rich history of pantheistic Andean cosmology that long ago underwent syncretism with Catholicism, similar to Haitian voodoo and Cuban Santeria, thanks to the catastrophic influence of 16th century Spanish colonizers.
We Spaniards know a sickness of the heart that only gold can cure.
Now, Case is here with a pretty simplistically shot and edited video, which interestingly he has chosen to score with some pretty funky 70s music that I've only ever heard in one kind of film production before,
Bow chicka bow wow.
in which he makes the age-old apologist claim that atheism is impossible.
It's not possible. No, it's not possible.
And that he alone has the goods to prove that claim. So let's dive in and see exactly what the old Dutchman has to bring to the table.
Hi.
Oh, an actual greeting for once. I will admit it's a nice change of pace for an apologist to kick one of these things off in such a friendly manner.
How do you know that there's a God?
And a straightforward question to boot. Gotta say, I'm impressed, Case. If you're not careful, you're gonna make your fellow apologists look bad. But to answer your question, my position is that while many people out there do believe that a god or gods exist because they've either convinced themselves or they've been convinced by others that such entities actually do exist, no one on this planet actually knows if such an entity or entities actually exist. And the reasoning behind that is because belief and knowledge, while related, are not the same thing. The most important difference being that knowledge is composed of the set of propositions that have been demonstrated to be true, most often independently, making the position of holding them as being true rationally justified, while beliefs alone enjoy a certain amount of freedom from such strict distinctions, and are generally held as being true because the individual has been convinced of them. Now, this of course does not entail that beliefs alone are necessarily false, or that holding beliefs that are not rationally justified is necessarily a bad thing, just so long as the individual is intellectually honest enough to change their position should evidence be presented that would warrant it. All this basically means is that until an individual can provide a rational justification for the beliefs that they hold, they have no justification for claiming that what they believe is actually true in reality. But all of that aside, Case, the title to your video is how atheism is impossible, which, if you actually know what you're talking about, implies that you're going to present a logical contradiction that is necessarily entailed by the position of not believing that a god or gods exists, which is something that I definitely want to hear.
It's actually a very simple question, and the answer is so easy. By doing some deductive reasoning, you can know that there is a God.
Well, seeing as how this question has been around since the God concept entered human lexicon untold millennia ago, I'm going to hazard that it's not as simple a question as you may think it is. And I can't be the first person to ever tell you that deductive arguments alone are not evidence for anything, let alone the existence of a God. In fact, it's been my experience that the deductive arguments presented by apologists often just wind up exposing their own personal incredulity.
You can also show it to others. Now, as with most apologetics, most unbelievers will not accept this because their reason for being an unbeliever is not a scientific reason or a logical reason.
Oh, Case, you silly old Dutchman. You started this whole thing off on such a good foot. Friendly greetings, simple questions, stated your purpose, and then you had to go and poison the well. But to be completely honest, I was kind of expecting it at some point. So at least we got it out of the way early. But to address that, while you are right on the first claim, you are dead wrong on the second one. Firstly, being an atheist does not logically entail holding to any other specific philosophical or scientific position. And my understanding of science has no bearing on why exactly I am an atheist. Atheism has to do with rationality, reason, logical consistency, and justification, not science, so you are right on that. Foundationally, science has nothing to do with atheism. However, secondly, if there exists no rational justification to accept a given proposition about external reality, such as your God claim, as being true, then one should not accept that proposition as being true until that which provides rational justification, such as evidence, is presented. Put simply, atheists do not believe your positive God claim because thus far you and your ilk have been unable to demonstrate that such an entity actually exists in external reality without at minimum begging the question, which would obviously entail that any reasoning behind accepting that proposition as being true would be fallacious, which means the atheist position is not only logically consistent, it is rationally justified.
The power of God for salvation is in the gospel, not in human reasoning.
You know, I'm not even sure that you're completely aware of what you just did there, Case. So let's hear it one more time. You said this about atheists.
Now, as with most apologetics, most unbelievers will not accept this because their reason for being an unbeliever is not a scientific reason or a logical reason.
And then you just conceded this about your own position.
The power of God for salvation is in the gospel, not in human reasoning.
Uh-oh.
In the event that you didn't know, Case, there is a meticulous process that we human beings utilize in order to establish if the propositions that we make about the reality that we collectively perceive are currently understood to be true, false, or indeterminate. It is through that meticulous process that we are able to derive and further our understanding of the universe that we exist in. And one of the most important parts of that process is the elimination of personal bias through independent testing. In short, Case, your emotions alone have no bearing on what is and isn't independently true of your experience. What you don't seem to grasp here, and this is precisely why your own words betrayed you, is that if the supernatural claims in your particular book were in fact true, then we as a species would be able to directly apply our meticulous methodology to those claims, and as such would at least at some level be able to establish their truth, and then improve our understanding of them as being true about reality. That is rationality, logic, and reason in action. But you just admitted that in order to accept the position of holding the Gospels as being true, one must, as you cited Proverbs 3:5, lean not on their own understanding, but solely accept what the book says as being true, despite the existence of any logical inconsistencies or obvious contradictions within. Basically, your position is to accept the book as being true without any rational justification to do so, which means you literally just admitted that your own position logically necessitates doing exactly what you are accusing atheists of doing.
Hypocrite!
Word of advice for future content. Script this stuff out so that you don't wind up killing your own position within the first 30 seconds.
But this is a very logical short proof for there being a God.
Okay, Case, let's have this argument that you think shows atheism to be impossible.
At the end, I'll share one more passage that actually proves a theory that Einstein invented, after it had been in the Bible for over 2,500 years.
Whoa, hold up there, little Dutch boy. You do realize that the God proposed by mainstream Christianity and Einstein's conceptualization, not a theory by the way, of the God concept are in no way the same thing, right? I mean, for one, Christianity is by definition theistic. It's God being an agent that interacts directly with the universe. And Einstein's concept was really more of a physics-grounded version of deism that had more in common with Baruch Spinoza's idea of panentheism. Not to mention, Einstein's conceptualization remains completely unfalsifiable, whereas the God of Christianity has mountains of insane logical entailments that we can analyze in order to debunk its existence. So, needless to say, it's kind of weird that you think the Bible supports deism.
So let's assume that we don't know. Or we are agnostic. That's what the word agnostic means, without knowledge.
Better to just acknowledge that rather than assume it.
Now let's figure out a basic question. Where did everything come from?
The old cosmological argument, which, as anyone who understands it knows, is not evidence for the existence of any god, and is just a deductive argument predicated upon unjustified assumptions being made about the universe itself and about the definitional nature of the god, that are only justified through the commission of a host of logical fallacies, such as the argument from personal incredulity, the argument from ignorance, and appeals to popularity, that themselves stem from general scientific ignorance and intellectual dishonesty. To answer that question, though, the evidence that we currently have access to indicates that while the universe we occupy does have an origin point of observability that we collectively refer to by the misnomer the Big Bang, the universe itself does not have a specific beginning point but merely changes states, meaning that the universe that we currently observe is just in one state that it can possibly be in. This conclusion, while not definitive, is backed by observational evidence, mathematical and predictive modeling, and is the most parsimonious, meaning that this conclusion is the one that makes the fewest number of assumptions in order to arrive at it. So, Case, unless you're able to demonstrate the existence of your God and the mechanistic relationship between it and everything else that is not it without begging the question, then the cosmological argument, just like all the other arguments for your God, falls flat on its face.
Where did the world come from? Where did life come from?
Well, the Earth, not to mention the rest of the planets in our system, through the process of accretion, formed a little over 4.5 billion years ago from a protoplanetary disk of orbiting material left over from the formation of the Sun. Life itself, given the evidence, is most likely the result of a process that we call abiogenesis, which, put very, very simplistically, describes the formation of self-replicating molecules through naturally occurring organic chemical interactions. And like I said, if your argument is that such processes are impossible without a god, you'd first have to show the logical contradiction that would render them as being impossible. And if you can't do that, you'd have to cop to your argument being nothing more than one from personal incredulity.
I'm going to narrow it down to two choices, something or nothing.
Well, not only is that a false dichotomy, because there are numerous other logical possibilities, notably the one where the universe has simply always existed in one state or another, but it's also really dangerous ground for your worldview. If you're about to make the claim that atheists hold that everything came from nothing, which of course we don't because that's a logically contradictory statement, being a Christian, you do hold in your worldview that at some point all that existed was your God, and that it literally actualized everything that is not itself out of nothing with its God magic.
Magic.
Which means you would again be accusing atheists of doing exactly what your own worldview requires you to do. Honestly, man, does your hypocrisy know no bounds?
Can you think of another choice between those two?
The universe has always existed in one state or another. Now, can I demonstrate that to be the case? Of course not. But there's no logical contradiction there, and it doesn't multiply our entities unnecessarily.
Realize that if you say energy, that would be something. It would not be nothing.
True, but that energy being something is in no way equivalent to your theistic God concept. Unless, of course, you're willing to drop the mainstream Christian definition of what a God is, switch to classical deism, pantheism, or panentheism, and just redefine it as being the capacity to do work. But that, of course, would just entail your redefining of terms as being nothing more than an appeal to emotion.
It couldn't be nothing, because that would absolutely make no sense whatsoever.
You're actually right. Something from what we would ostensibly refer to as a philosophical nothing is a logically contradictory statement. And that's not what atheists hold to, nor is it logically entailed by holding to the atheist position. So the question really is, why are you posing this to atheists and not to your fellow Christians? A group who do hold that something coming from nothing is logically possible.
There had to be something for all eternity past.
Right, and that thing is what we refer to as the universe itself. Because for one, we know the universe exists, and two, we don't have to assume the existence of anything that we can't demonstrate any access to.
You can try this with a bank that you don't have an account with. Try withdrawing money. If it works, please teach me.
While that example of the bank is ultimately disanalogous, I do get what you're trying to say. Like I noted before, Case, there seems to be some moments where you really do get the point. So I don't really understand your rationale behind your poisoning the well, presenting a false dichotomy, and not holding your fellow believers to the same logically consistent standard.
So we can deduce from this that there always was at least something. For all eternity,
Correction case. That conclusion is not the result of deductive reasoning. It was a result of a type of inference called inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is a logical process in which a conclusion is guaranteed to be true in virtue of its premises being true, though this doesn't automatically mean that the syllogism is sound or actually true. Inductive reasoning, which is a specific type of inference, is when a general conclusion is reached based on patterns and examples but is not guaranteed to be true by its premises. That all being said, even if what you posed had been a result of deductive reasoning, it still wouldn't be evidence that your God exists.
What it is, we haven't figured out yet.
And that would be the most logically consistent and honest thing you've said so far.
So then the next question. There's something which was eternal. Was it something personal or impersonal?
Well, the answer to that, given the evidence, is impersonal. The universe itself is just a system in which our species currently exists, and there is no evidence to indicate that our species is special in the universe, nor that the universe is designed specifically in a way to be observed in the way that humans observe it. Concluding otherwise is just unjustified, top-down, cart before the horse thinking. I mean, I get that you want to be special in the universe, and that you are conditioned to believe that life on this planet, especially humans, are special in the universe, but everything that we can demonstrate that we actually have access to indicates the exact opposite.
Something personal would be a being that has personality.
I may be splitting hairs here, but that's kind of a weird way of phrasing that. Usually, personal in this theological context simply refers to a creating agent that desires to have a personal relationship with the agents within its creation. It's generally utilized to denote agency and intentionality behind the existence of the universe.
Something impersonal would be like a rock, energy, gas, or some liquid.
Or, and I'm just spitballing here, just the universe itself.
Anyway, now the question again is, are there any other options?
And see, this is where your intellectual dishonesty winds up shooting you in the foot. For one, you're being overly reductive in your description of what it means to be impersonal. Impersonal doesn't just mean inanimate. It can also refer to a creating agent that is either incapable of or simply doesn't want a personal relationship with its creation. And by the way, this is what is entailed by the position of classical deism. And secondly, as the existence of an impersonal deity is a logical, albeit unfalsifiable possibility, that makes what you're presenting here, the choices of there either being a personal agent or an impersonal inanimate object, yet another false dichotomy. It's honestly very weird to know that you are a self-proclaimed gospel-believing Christian, yet you prefaced your presentation with the claim that the Bible supports the concept of deism, and yet now here you are in the video deliberately ignoring the logical possibility of classical deism just so that you can smuggle in your God concept.
You don't even know what you're doing, do you?
At this point, being unable to determine if your intellectual dishonesty is intentional or not, I would just say have the courage of your own convictions, stop trying so desperately to dodge the logical pitfalls of your own worldview, and just bite the bullet on the fact that your reasoning here is utterly fallacious.
I myself can't think of any other options.
Probably because your cult manual strictly commands you to not think about this stuff, which, by the way, is what we refer to as information control, which is a behavioral control tactic that is heavily employed by authoritarian control systems such as cults. The moment they told you that not thinking for yourself would at some point become a requirement should have been the first red flag.
Could we all have come from something impersonal?
Yes, it is a logical possibility that life as we understand it is a result of naturally occurring unguided forces. There is no logical contradiction there.
That would not make any sense either.
No, it makes complete sense because it's a rational and parsimonious conclusion as well as logically possible. That you don't happen to like that possibility is irrelevant.
First question would be, how did personality develop?
Wait, what?
Seriously, Case? Your argument is that because we humans have what we call personalities, which is really just the label that we subjectively give to the set of characteristics that form an individual's distinctive character, therefore it's only possible for human beings to exist if they were created by an entity that itself possesses a personality.
Your logic does not resemble our Earth logic.
At first blush, you at least have to realize that this is nothing more than a non sequitur, and that's because the existence of a personality does not logically entail the existence of a desire for specific intention towards anything in particular. In fact, a lack of desire or lack of intention could be characteristics included within that personality set. I get that you may think that you can utilize esoteric or proprietary definitions in order to justify a particular deductive argument, and that you may think that doing so provides sufficient justification for your your belief in the existence of your particular God. But all one would have to do is simply reject your very specific definitions of these terms in order to show that your argument is at minimum unsound, meaning that you would have no way of demonstrating the actual truth of it. And yes, that includes appealing to your subjective interpretation of the Bible, unless of course you can demonstrate that you alone have solved the exegetical and hermeneutical problems, which I can assure you you have not.
I mean, we don't see a rock getting angry. Our furniture doesn't fall in love with some other piece of furniture. Have you ever seen an anxious box? Even when you are about to throw it in the trash?
Well, first, none of those are analogous to your God concept. Second, if you're talking about the Christian God itself, then you just killed that logical possibility of existence, because all of those things that you mentioned are logically contradictory states, given that that particular entity is defined as being omniscient, meaning that it knows all true propositions infallibly. And lastly, if you're talking about deism, you can't demonstrate that any of those things actually apply to that unfalsifiable entity, which ultimately would mean that you're defining this entity in this proprietary way just so that you can make this particularly terrible argument.
Second of all, the second law of thermodynamics,
hold on to your butts,
teaches us that everything will go towards disorder. Energy will go towards less useful type of energy. Turn the light on and part of the energy will go towards heat. It really goes against all logic. That's to say that something complex, as for instance, the human body, could develop without a designer.
Oh, you're one of those apologists who thinks that evolution is somehow contradicted by the second law of thermodynamics, aren't you? And you likely think that because you've never realized, or just never learned, that while the universe itself is described as either a closed or isolated system, the Earth itself is classified as an open system, with energy coming in from the sun and leaving via radiative cooling and ejecta. This is probably why you just articulated this as an argument from personal incredulity. I find that the best way to think about this relationship is to imagine the universe as a giant river, and to imagine the energy as the water in that river flowing in one direction. Now imagine the Earth as a boat on that river. Now, while that boat is irrevocably traveling in the direction of the river, simultaneously things in the river can enter the boat and things in the boat can enter the river. Basic analogies like the one I just presented are some of the things that you pick up on when you stay in school and actually learn about these things so that you can communicate about them accurately.
When you see a beautiful painting, you know that there was a painter who made it. A book is written by an author and a building is designed by an architect. So creation is made by creator.
Yes, we're all familiar with the watchmaker fallacy. First, none of those things that you mentioned are analogous to the universe itself because humans have no experience of universe making. Second, your inability to reconcile that logical possibility is just a result of your own personal incredulity. And third, even if the universe were designed by an agent, it would not logically entail that that agent was the God that you happen to believe in. As a suggestion case, if you've never heard of the Scottish philosopher David Hume, I strongly recommend that you get to reading.
Because the only logical conclusion that we can come to is that everything came from something eternal.
I suppose you could come to that, and the culprit would be energy itself. No logical contradiction, parsimonious, and rationally justified by the evidence and predictive modeling. No gods or intentions needed.
That has personality.
Oh, you almost had it. Nope, no personality is required either.
At the end, I promise you one passage which really shows how God made everything.
Oh, now you're talking about the mechanistic relationship between your God and everything else that isn't itself. I'd love to hear this mechanistic breakdown of what is ostensibly God magic.
It's Jeremiah 10, verse 12. He hath made the earth by his power.
Yeah, I'm just gonna cut you off there, Case. There's no mechanistic breakdown for how your God did anything in that verse. It's just the oft-repeated claim that your God did it via God magic, which means literally nothing in the face of your inability to demonstrate that such an entity actually exists. And we're gonna go ahead and skip this last section so that I can save you the cerebral pain of hearing Case equating his God magicking everything into existence with Einstein's E=mc² formula. Thankfully, my years of doing these responses has given me the intestinal fortitude to not result in me diving headlong into an empty pool. Suffice to say, Case, you still have a lot of work to do before anything you have to say actually makes any kind of sense. And I know that many people will likely say that given your age, you're probably set in your ways. But I think old dogs can still learn a few new tricks, just so long as that old dog is interested in what is actually true and has the ability to be intellectually honest about it. Now, when it comes to bridging the divide here, I think it'll be best to keep things simple. Conclusions of the likes that Case is making here are just a result of a lack of or deliberate rejection of education. And it's in ensuring that his audience constantly has ready access to that information through open communication and resource citing that we can limit the amount of societal damage that people like Case can do. It's that open communication of ideas that authoritarian control systems such as Christianity do everything in their power to avoid. It's a massive red flag that many members of these groups have either been convinced or been conditioned to believe doesn't exist. That's why one of the best things that anyone can do is patiently and compassionately remind them that it is there. It's also important to note that this is exactly the reason why groups like C10 target third world nations. Nations that often experience high poverty and unemployment rates as well as low education rates for their missionary work. And I think when both sides of the argument can recognize that deliberately targeting the systemically ignorant and emotionally vulnerable for conversion and money is both individually harmful and societally dangerous, I think that we will be better able to establish a solid foundation for future discussion on the grounds that the betterment of people's lives should always take priority over convincing them of things that cannot be demonstrated to be true. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please like, share, and subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. And be sure to leave a comment below. I love reading your responses, and those interactions help with the dreaded algorithm. Don't forget, June is LGBTQ+ Pride Month. A link to where you can support these important efforts is down in the description. And coinciding with today's video, I will be appearing on Truth Wanted tonight, so I hope to see all of you there. A link to that is also in the description. Lastly, if you like what you saw here and would like to support this channel further, links to channel membership and to get yourself some official Bridge the Divide gear are also in the description. Once again, a massive thank you to each and every one of you for your continued support, and as always, be safe, be excellent to each other, and together, we can bridge the divide.